The rebellion began to take shape in the quiet moments between shifts, whispered conversations hidden beneath the hum of machinery. Jack, Lyra, Kellis, and Nyx formed the core of the group, each bringing their unique skills to the table. Syrah hesitated at first, torn between her loyalty to the factory and her growing unease about its true purpose. But when she saw how determined the others were, she finally agreed to join them, though her optimism wavered under the weight of what they were planning. Their first step was sabotage. The Central Processing Core, a massive machine that controlled every aspect of synthetic production, was their target. Destroying it would cripple the facility's operations and expose the truth about Project Genesis. But getting close to the core wouldn't be easy. It was housed in a heavily guarded chamber deep within the factory. To pull this off, they needed precision and a lot of luck. Kalis took charge of mapping out the route. Using her knowledge of the factory's layout, she identified weak points in the security system. "There's an access tunnel near the plasma welding line," she explained during one of their secret meetings. "It leads directly to the core. If we time it right, we can slip through without being detected." Nyx volunteered to handle distractions. Her ability to shift forms made her perfect for creating diversions. She suggested luring guards away by mimicking the appearance of high-ranking overseers or triggering false alarms in distant parts of the factory. "Leave the chaos to me," she said with a sly grin, her shadowy figure flickering like smoke. Lyra focused on disabling the surveillance systems. As a telepath, she could sense when someone was watching, making her invaluable for spotting potential threats. "I'll keep an eye on the cameras," she promised. "But if anything goes wrong, you're on your own." Syrah, despite her fears, offered to act as the medic. "If anyone gets hurt, I'll patch them up," she chirped, though her voice lacked its usual brightness. Still, her presence brought a small measure of comfort to the group. Jack coordinated the plan, using his engineering expertise to design a device capable of overloading the core. "We need something that will cause enough damage to shut it down permanently," he explained, sketching diagrams on a scrap of paper. "But not so much that it puts us all in danger." On the night of the operation, tension hung thick in the air. The team gathered in a secluded corner of the factory, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of emergency lights. Jack gave each member a final nod before they split up, moving silently toward their assigned tasks. Everything went according to plan. At first, Nyx created a commotion near the loading docks, drawing guards away from the core. Lyra disabled cameras along the access tunnel, giving Jack and Kellis a clear path forward. Syrah stayed behind, ready to treat any injuries. But as Jack and Kellis reached the core chamber, disaster struck. 2 biomechanical drones, enforcers sent by Xylotech's higher-ups, appeared out of nowhere, blocking their way. The machines moved with mechanical precision, their red eyes locking onto the intruders. Thinking quickly, Jack grabbed a nearby plasma cutter and aimed it at the drones. "Distract them," he shouted to Kellis. With a fierce roar, Kellis lunged at the drones, her claws slicing through one of their limbs. The other drone turned its attention to her, firing a volley of energy blasts. Jack used the distraction to activate his overload device, attaching it to the core's main console. As alarms blared throughout the factory, Jack yelled, "Let's move." Together, he and Kellis sprinted back toward the access tunnel, narrowly avoiding the collapsing chamber behind them. When they reunited with the others, adrenaline surged through the group. They had done it, or so they thought. Little did they know, their actions had attracted unwanted attention, and betrayal loomed closer than ever. Jack Harper had always been a man of simple ambitions. Growing up in the outer colonies of Earth, he dreamed of stability, just enough credits to keep his rickety apartment running, and maybe save a little for retirement. But life hadn't been kind to him lately. After losing yet another low-paying gig fixing broken drones on a mining station, Jack found himself scrolling through Galactic job boards late one night. His eyes landed on an ad that seemed too good to pass up. Galactic manufacturing specialist needed. High pay, free housing, travel opportunities. The listing didn't specify much beyond vague promises of adventure and steady income. For Jack, it was exactly what he needed, a chance to escape the monotony of his failing existence. Without hesitation, he submitted his application. A week later, he received confirmation. He'd been hired by HFY Industries, stationed at their facility on Zanara 7. Jack barely even knew where Zanara 7 was, but he packed his meager belongings into a duffel bag and boarded the next transport ship. The journey took 3 days, during which Jack spent most of his time staring out the window at the endless expanse of stars. He imagined what awaited him, a bustling factory filled with humans like him, all working together toward some grand interstellar goal. When the ship finally descended onto Zanara 7, however, reality hit hard. The planet's surface was barren, dotted with jagged rocks and swirling dust storms. In the distance stood the massive structure of HFY Industries, its metallic walls gleaming under the dim light of a distant sun. As Jack stepped off the shuttle, he was greeted by a towering figure unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was Commander Valra, the supervisor of the facility, her insectoid frame glinting with iridescent hues. Her 6 limbs moved with precision as she extended one hand, or claw, toward him. "You must be Jack Harper," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "Welcome to HFY." Before Jack could respond, 2 other figures approached, one a sleek, feline-like alien with glowing blue eyes, and the other a reptilian engineer whose scales shimmered like polished emerald. Both introduced themselves briefly before ushering him inside. As they walked through the corridors of the factory, Jack noticed something odd. Every worker he passed was female. Not just human women, either. Aliens of all shapes, sizes, and species, each more exotic than the last. By the time he reached the break room, Jack's mind was racing. "Where are the men?" he asked hesitantly, trying not to sound rude. The feline alien, her name was Lyra, smirked slightly. "You're looking at him," she replied, gesturing toward Jack. Realization dawned on him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just the newest employee. He was the only male in the entire operation. Overwhelmed but determined to make the best of it, Jack attended orientation. There he learned about the factory's mission, producing advanced components for interstellar trade. What he didn't learn, however, was why this particular facility required such an unusual workforce, or why everyone seemed so guarded when answering his questions. By the end of the day, as Jack lay in his assigned quarters, a small, sterile room with a single bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled into something far bigger than he'd bargained for. Little did he know, his arrival would change everything, for better or worse. Jack's first day at HFY Industries began with a blaring alarm that echoed through the facility like a warning siren. He groggily rolled out of bed, still adjusting to the strange hum of alien technology around him. After pulling on his uniform, a sleek gray jumpsuit emblazoned with the HFY logo, he made his way to the cafeteria for breakfast. The room was bustling with activity, and Jack felt like an outsider in his own workplace. Every worker seemed to glide effortlessly between tables, exchanging greetings in languages he couldn't understand. Their laughter and chatter filled the air, creating a sense of camaraderie that only highlighted Jack's isolation. Lyra, the feline-like alien who had greeted him upon arrival, waved him over to her table. She sat alongside Callus, the reptilian engineer with sharp claws and sharper wit, and Nyx, a shadowy figure whose form seemed to shift slightly every time Jack blinked. "You'll get used to it," Lyra said, her telepathic voice resonating softly in his mind. "Just don't ask too many questions." Jack nodded nervously as he picked at his meal, a gelatinous blob that tasted faintly of citrus. He tried making small talk, asking about their roles in the factory. Kalis explained she worked on the plasma welding line, while Nyx mentioned something vague about quality control. When Jack asked what exactly they were manufacturing, both women exchanged uneasy glances before changing the subject. After breakfast, Commander Valra led Jack on a tour of the factory floor. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Massive machines stretched toward the ceiling, pulsating with glowing lights and emitting low, rhythmic hums. Conveyor belts crisscrossed the space, carrying components that looked more organic than mechanical. Some even twitched or shimmered as if alive. Workers moved with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed dance. Despite the impressive setup, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed how some workers avoided eye contact when he passed by, while others whispered behind their hands. Even Commander Valorous seemed unusually tense, her antennae twitching whenever he lingered too long near certain areas. By midday, Jack's confusion deepened during a mandatory energy drink break. Everyone gathered in a large lounge area where glowing beverages were dispensed from futuristic machines. Lyra handed him a glass filled with neon green liquid. "Drink up," she urged. "It's part of the routine here." Reluctantly, Jack took a sip. It tasted sweet, but left a tingling sensation on his tongue. As the workers chatted animatedly, Jack overheard snippets of conversation. Some spoke of quotas they needed to meet, while others complained about the relentless pace. One phrase caught his attention: the directive. When he asked Lyra about it later, her expression darkened. "Forget you heard that," she warned. "Curiosity isn't safe here." Later that evening, Jack attended a bonding ritual, a weekly tradition meant to foster teamwork. The event involved sitting in a circle and sharing personal stories. Though hesitant at first, Jack found himself opening up about his struggles back on Earth. To his surprise, the women listened intently, offering words of encouragement. For a brief moment, he felt accepted, almost like part of the group. But as the night wore on, Jack noticed subtle tensions simmering beneath the surface. Arguments broke out over minor issues, and several workers stormed off in frustration. By the time the ritual ended, Jack realized this wasn't just a team of colleagues. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. Back in his quarters, Jack replayed the day's events in his mind. Something about this place didn't add up. The guarded conversations, the mysterious directive, the eerie hum of the machines. It all pointed to secrets hidden within the walls of Silotech Industries. As he drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered. What had he gotten himself into? Jack's resolve hardened after his conversation with Lyra and Callus. Armed with their cautious support, and the knowledge that he wasn't alone in wanting answers, he decided to dig deeper into Project Genesis. Late one night, while most of the factory was quiet, Jack slipped away from his quarters and headed toward the restricted areas once again. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Nyx had silently joined him, her shadowy form blending seamlessly with the dimly lit corridors. Without a word, she disabled security cameras and motion sensors, clearing the way for Jack to access the central database. Inside the secure terminal room, Jack worked quickly, navigating through layers of encrypted files. His hands trembled as he pieced together fragments of information. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. Project Genesis wasn't just about creating synthetic life forms. It was about replacing entire populations on endangered planets. These synthetics were designed not only to mimic alien species, but also to integrate into their societies without anyone realizing they weren't real. But there was more. Buried within the data were logs detailing experiments gone wrong. Synthetics who had developed sentience, emotions, even desires. Some had questioned their purpose or resisted commands, prompting Silotech to dismantle them and recycle their components back into the production line. The logs described these beings as defective units, but to Jack, they sounded hauntingly human. Nyx placed a hand on his shoulder, startling him. Her form shifted slightly, revealing concern in her otherwise unreadable features. "You've seen enough," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to leave before someone notices." Reluctantly, Jack closed the terminal and followed Nyx back to the main part of the factory. As they walked, his mind raced with the implications of what he'd learned. How could such cruelty exist under the guise of progress? And how many sentient beings had been destroyed in the name of efficiency? The next morning, Jack confronted Commander Valra during a routine inspection. He couldn't stay silent any longer. "I know what you're doing here," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "These synthetics, they're alive. You can't keep treating them like machines." Valra's insectoid frame stiffened, her antennae twitching sharply. For a moment, she looked almost conflicted. Then her expression hardened. "Sentience is irrelevant," she replied coldly. "What matters is survival. Entire civilizations depend on our work. Would you rather let them die out completely? That doesn't justify murder." Jack snapped, his frustration boiling over. Valra stepped closer, towering over him. "You think this is easy for us. Every decision we make comes at a cost. But sacrifices must be made for the greater good." Though shaken by her words, Jack refused to back down. Later that day, he shared everything he'd uncovered with Lyra, Kellis, and Sira. They listened in stunned silence, their faces reflecting a mix of anger, fear, and sorrow. "We have to stop this," Jack said firmly. "If we don't, we're no better than them." Lyra nodded slowly. "If we act, it has to be smart, not reckless." Kellis cracked her knuckles, her golden eyes gleaming with determination. "Then let's burn this place to the ground." Sira hesitated, her cheerful demeanor replaced by unease. "And if we fail, they'll destroy us too." Jack met each of their gazes, his resolve unwavering. "We might not survive. But if we do nothing, none of us will ever truly be free." For the first time, Jack felt like more than just an outsider among aliens. He was part of something bigger, a rebellion brewing in the shadows of Silotech Industries. Together, they began planning their next move, knowing full well the risks ahead. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself growing closer to some of the alien women at Silotech Industries. Though their world was still shrouded in mystery, these connections gave him a sense of belonging, and a much-needed distraction from the unsettling truths he'd uncovered. Each interaction brought new insights, not just about his coworkers, but also about the fragile dynamics holding the factory together. Kellis, the reptilian engineer with sharp wit and sharper claws, became one of Jack's earliest allies. She often joined him during repairs, offering tips on how to handle the temperamental plasma welders that powered many of the machines. "You humans are clumsy," she teased one day as Jack struggled to recalibrate a welding arm. "But you're persistent. I'll give you that." Despite her gruff exterior, Kellis had a softer side she rarely showed. One evening, after hours of working side by side, she opened up about her past. Her species came from a dying planet, where overpopulation and resource scarcity forced many to leave home in search of work. "This job pays well enough to send credits back to my family," she admitted quietly, "even if it means putting up with questionable practices." Then there was Nyx, the shadowy shapeshifter whose presence always seemed to linger just out of sight. Unlike the others, Nyx didn't speak much. Her form shifted subtly depending on her mood, making her expressions hard to read. But Jack noticed she had a knack for appearing exactly when he needed help. Once, while trapped under a malfunctioning piece of machinery, Nyx materialized out of nowhere, her body morphing into a dense, muscular shape strong enough to lift the equipment off him. "Thanks," Jack gasped, rubbing his sore shoulder. Nyx simply nodded before fading back into the shadows. Over time, Jack realized her silence wasn't aloofness, it was caution. Whatever secrets Nyx carried, they weighed heavily on her. Sira, the bubbly amphibian medic, provided a stark contrast to the others. With her iridescent skin and constant stream of cheerful chatter, Sira brightened even the dreariest corners of the factory. Every morning, she insisted on giving Jack a quick health check, scanning his vitals with a handheld device. "Your heart rate is elevated again," she chirped one day, tilting her head curiously. "Are you stressed? Or maybe hiding something?" Jack laughed nervously, brushing off her question. Beneath her playful demeanor, however, Sira seemed unusually invested in keeping everyone healthy, not just physically but emotionally. It was almost as if she feared what might happen if anyone fell ill or grew too disheartened. Despite their differences, all four women shared a common thread. They felt trapped. Conversations with them revealed hints of frustration and longing for freedom. Lyra, who had initially warned Jack against prying, eventually confided in him during a quiet moment in the break room. "We signed contracts we didn't fully understand," she explained, her glowing blue eyes clouded with regret. "They promised us opportunities, a chance to make a difference. Instead, we're cogs in a machine none of us can escape." Jack sympathized deeply with their plight. He saw echoes of his own struggles in their stories. People trying to survive in a system rigged against them. These bonds strengthened his resolve to uncover the truth about Project Genesis and find a way to help them all break free. One night, after another bonding ritual, Jack sat with Lyra and Callus in the lounge area. The conversation turned serious as they discussed their suspicions about the factory's operations. "The synthetics. They're alive," Jack said finally, breaking the tension-filled silence. Both women exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't deny it. "If you're planning something," Callus said cautiously, "you'd better be sure it's worth risking everything." Jack nodded grimly. For the first time since arriving on Cenera 7, he felt like he had allies, and perhaps even friends. But friendship came with responsibility, and Jack knew the stakes were higher than ever. The victory was short-lived. As the group regrouped in a hidden maintenance alcove, their breathing heavy and hearts pounding, they realized something felt off. The factory's alarms hadn't stopped blaring, but there was an eerie silence from the guards who should have been swarming the area by now. Instead, it seemed like the entire facility was holding its breath, waiting. Sura was the first to notice. Her amphibian skin shimmered faintly as she shifted nervously, her wide eyes darting around the room. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her usually cheerful voice trembling. "They know we're here." Before anyone could respond, a sharp hiss echoed through the corridor. The group turned to see Commander Valera striding toward them, flanked by two biomechanical enforcers. Behind her trailed Sira, her head bowed and hands clasped tightly together. "You betrayed us," Jack said, his voice laced with disbelief as he stared at Sira. "I didn't have a choice." Sira cried, tears glistening on her cheeks. "They promised me freedom if I told them everything. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped, afraid." Valera raised one clawed hand, silencing Sira with a dismissive wave. "Your rebellion ends here," she declared, her insectoid frame towering over them. "You've caused enough damage already." Lyra stepped forward, her glowing blue eyes blazing with defiance. "You can't keep hiding what you're doing here forever," she spat. "Sooner or later, the truth will come out." "The truth," Valera sneered. "The galaxy only cares about results, not ethics. What we create saves lives, even if some must be sacrificed along the way." Jack clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. He glanced at his teammates, searching for a way out of this mess. But escape seemed impossible. The enforcers blocked every exit, their red optics trained on the group like predators stalking prey. Then Nyx moved. In a flash, her shadowy form shifted into a dense, muscular shape, slamming into one of the enforcers with enough force to send it crashing into the wall. Sparks flew as the machine struggled to reboot. "Go," Nyx shouted, her voice distorted by her transformation. "No," Lyra protested, reaching out to pull her back. "We stick together." "There's no time," Nyx snapped, shoving another drone away as it lunged toward them. "Get out of here while you still can." Reluctantly, the others followed Jack's lead, sprinting down the corridor as Nyx held off the enforcers. Her form flickered wildly as energy blasts tore through her shifting body, but she refused to yield. As they rounded a corner, Jack heard a final, gut-wrenching scream echo behind them. He wanted to turn back, to help Nyx, But Kalis grabbed his arm and yanked him forward. She knew what she was doing, Kalis growled, her golden eyes filled with pain. Don't let her sacrifice be wasted. They eventually reached a service hatch leading outside, where fresh air greeted them like a lifeline. But even as they escaped the confines of the factory, grief weighed heavily on the group. Nyx had given her life to buy them freedom, and Syrah's betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Once they were far enough away, Jack collapsed onto the rocky ground, staring up at the stars. "What do we do now?" he asked quietly. Lyra knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We finish what we started," she said firmly. "For Nyx, for everyone who suffered because of this place." Kalis nodded, her expression grim but resolute. "And we make sure Hylotech pays for what they've done." But unknown to them, their actions had triggered a response from higher powers within the company. As they plotted their next move, a mysterious AI known as the Architect began analyzing their every step and uncovering secrets about Jack that would change everything. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. By his third day at Hylotech Industries, Jack had settled into a routine, or at least as much of one as he could manage in such an unfamiliar environment. His role as a maintenance technician kept him busy fixing malfunctioning machines and troubleshooting issues on the factory floor. While the work was challenging, it gave him an excuse to wander through different sections of the facility, observing the intricate operations up close. But the more time he spent among the humming machinery, the more questions gnawed at him. One evening, while repairing a conveyor belt that had jammed near the assembly line, Jack noticed something strange. The components moving along the belt weren't just pieces of metal or synthetic materials. They looked disturbingly organic. Some resembled pulsating veins, others glistened like translucent membranes, and a few even twitched faintly as if alive. Jack leaned closer, examining one piece carefully. It felt warm to the touch, almost like flesh. "What are you doing?" A voice startled him. He turned to see Kalis standing behind him, her emerald scales glinting under the overhead lights. Her golden eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Just checking these parts," Jack replied quickly, trying to sound casual. "They look unusual." Kalis hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "Don't touch them too much," she said sharply. "Some of those components are delicate." Jack nodded but couldn't shake the unease growing in his chest. As Kalis walked away, he decided to investigate further. After finishing the repair, he lingered near the assembly line, pretending to adjust settings on nearby machinery. From this vantage point, he watched as workers assembled the organic-looking pieces into larger structures, shapes that vaguely resembled humanoid forms. That night, unable to sleep, Jack snuck back onto the factory floor, armed with a small handheld scanner he'd borrowed from the maintenance bay. He explored areas he wasn't supposed to enter. One door caught his attention, a heavy reinforced hatch marked with warning symbols. Using his engineering skills, he bypassed the lock and slipped inside. The room beyond was dimly lit, filled with rows of tanks containing floating figures suspended in glowing liquid. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he approached one tank. Inside was what appeared to be a fully formed alien creature, its features eerily lifelike. Tubes connected it to the tank, feeding it nutrients or energy. As Jack scanned the room, he discovered a terminal displaying schematics labeled Project Genesis. The documents outlined plans for creating synthetic life forms designed to mimic specific alien species. Each creation was tailored to meet the needs of planets facing extinction-level crisis. At first glance, it seemed noble. But then Jack noticed annotations suggesting some of the synthetics had developed sentience. And worse still, there were logs detailing how such beings were dismantled and recycled back into the system once deemed obsolete. Suddenly, voices echoed outside the room. Panicking, Jack ducked behind a stack of crates as two workers entered, arguing heatedly. "We can't keep doing this," one said, her tone desperate. "These aren't just machines. They're alive. The directive says otherwise." The other snapped. If we stop now, everything falls apart. Jack held his breath until they left, his mind racing. What had started as curiosity was now a moral dilemma. Was he working for a company saving lives, or destroying them? When Jack returned to his quarters, he found Lyra waiting for him. She must have sensed his distress because she didn't ask where he'd been. Instead, she warned him softly, "You're playing with fire, Jack. Whatever you think you know, let it go, for your own sake." But Jack knew he couldn't turn away. Not now.